Welcome to APS Stories. Chapter 1. The Foundation of Trust. Rick Thompson had built his life like he built his construction empire, with precision, unwavering standards, and zero tolerance for structural weaknesses. At 42, his weathered hands and calculating gray eyes told the story of a man who'd clawed his way up from nothing. He'd started Thompson Construction with a borrowed truck and a fierce determination to prove wrong everyone who'd ever doubted him. His wife, Lindsay, had been the golden prize he'd won after achieving success. A former pharmaceutical sales rep with platinum blonde hair and a smile that could sell ice to Eskimos, she married him when his company hit its first $1 million year. Their daughter, Emma, now 16, was the one person who could soften Rick's granite exterior. "Dad, you worry too much," Emma often teased him, and Rick would smile because she was right. He worried about everything. Every beam, every foundation, every person in his carefully constructed world. The Thompson family lived in a sprawling ranch house that Rick had built himself on 20 acres outside Denver. Every nail, every board had been placed by his hands or under his watchful eye. Control wasn't just a preference for Rick, it was oxygen. Lindsay's mother, Dorothy Westfield, lived in the old Victorian house downtown where Lindsay had grown up. At 78, Dorothy was still sharp as a tack, but had been struggling with her mobility. When she'd asked if Emma could spend 3 weeks helping her sort through decades of accumulated belongings, Rick had readily agreed. "It'll be good for Emma to spend time with her grandmother," Lindsay had said, though Rick noticed she seemed oddly eager to have their daughter away for such an extended period. Rick had been working 14-hour days lately, pushing to finish a major commercial project that would cement Thompson Construction's reputation in the region. The Meridian Plaza was his masterpiece, a mixed-use development that would put his company on the map with the big players. Every detail mattered, every deadline was sacred. But even with his intense focus on work, Rick noticed subtle changes in Lindsay's behavior. She'd started working out more, buying new clothes, and spending increasing amounts of time at the spa with girlfriends. Her phone had gained a password, and she'd become protective of it in a way that seemed unnatural. Rick Thompson wasn't a man who ignored structural cracks, whether in buildings or relationships. But Lindsay had been his partner for 18 years, the mother of his child, and he'd built his trust in her as carefully as he built everything else. Surely, if there were problems, they could be addressed and repaired. On a sweltering Tuesday evening in July, Rick pulled into his driveway after another grueling day managing subcontractors and solving problems. The house felt different without Emma's laughter echoing through the halls. Lindsay was nowhere to be seen, though her car was in the garage. He found her in their bedroom, fresh from a shower, wrapped in a towel that seemed smaller than usual. "How was your day?" she asked, but her voice carried a distracted quality. Long ago. The electrical contractor screwed up the wiring in the east wing again. Had to tear out half a day's work. Rick loosened his tie, watching his wife in the mirror as she applied expensive moisturizer with unusual care. She responded absently. "I'm meeting Rebecca for dinner tonight." That new place downtown. Rick paused. Rebecca Morrison had been Lindsay's college roommate and remained her closest friend, but Rick couldn't remember the last time they'd actually spent time together. "Tell Rebecca I said hello," he said, testing. "Of course," Lindsay replied too quickly. That night, As Rick lay alone in their king-sized bed, he stared at the ceiling he'd textured himself and wondered when the foundation of his marriage had started showing stress fractures. Chapter 2. Cracks in the Foundation. Emma's daily calls had become the highlight of Rick's routine. His daughter's voice, bright and animated as she described helping Grandma Dorothy organize photo albums and sort through old clothes, provided a warmth that seemed to be draining from his home. "Dad, you should see some of the stuff Grandma has up in the attic." There are boxes and boxes of things from when Mom was growing up. "It's like a time capsule," Emma had said during their Monday evening call. "Just be careful up there, sweetheart. Those old houses can have weak floor joists." "I'm always careful, Dad. You taught me that." While Emma was away, Lindsay's absences became more frequent and her explanations increasingly vague. Book clubs that ran until midnight, charity meetings that required weekend travel, and an endless parade of friends Rick had either never met or hadn't seen in years. Rick's methodical mind began cataloging inconsistencies like he would structural defects in a building. The new gym membership she claimed to never use but somehow maintained a perfect tan. The credit card charges at restaurants across town when she claimed to be shopping locally. The way she'd started doing her own laundry, carefully separating her clothes from the family wash. By Thursday of Emma's second week away, Rick had made a decision that went against every trusting instinct he built his marriage on. He hired Connor Mills, a private investigator who'd done background checks for his construction company. Connor was discreet, thorough, and expensive. "I need to know if my wife is having an affair," Rick had said bluntly during their meeting in Connor's downtown office. Connor, a former Denver police detective with silver hair and knowing eyes, had simply nodded. "It'll take a few days to establish patterns. I'll need photos, her daily schedule, and vehicle information." "How long have you been married, Mr. Thompson?" 18 years this October. "Kids?" "One daughter. She's 16. Connor made notes in a worn leather portfolio. "In my experience, Mr. Thompson, when a man comes to me with suspicions this specific, he's usually right. The question isn't whether something's happening. It's what you plan to do with the information." Rick had built his life on facts, not speculation. "I need to know the truth. All of it. ... The truth has a way of changing everything, Mr. Thompson." "You sure you're ready for that?" Rick met the investigator's gaze with steel in his own. "I've never started a project I wasn't prepared to finish." Friday afternoon, Connor called with preliminary findings that hit Rick like a sledgehammer to the chest. "Your wife has been meeting regularly with a man named Trevor Grayson. Real estate agent, divorced, office downtown. They've been seen at restaurants, hotels, and his condo. Today, they spent 3 hours at the Marriott downtown. I have photos." Rick's hand tightened on his phone until his knuckles went white. "Send me everything." That evening, when Lindsay returned home with shopping bags and stories about a day spent with her sister Claire, Rick watched her with new eyes. Every gesture, every word, every carefully constructed lie fell into place like pieces of a puzzle he'd been unconsciously solving for months. "How's Claire doing?" he asked casually. You know Claire. Always something dramatic happening with her job." Lindsay's response came easily, practiced. Rick knew Claire was in Europe on her honeymoon because Lindsay had complained about missing the wedding just 2 weeks ago. That night, Rick lay awake planning. Rick Thompson had never been a man who simply reacted to problems. He identified them, analyzed them, and then systematically eliminated them. This situation would be no different. By dawn, Rick had the foundation of a plan that would make Connor Mills' warning about truth changing everything seem like an understatement. Chapter 3: The Discovery. Emma's call came on a Wednesday evening during her 3rd week at Grandma Dorothy's, just as Rick was reviewing Connor's latest surveillance photos. Trevor Grayson was younger than Rick had expected, probably mid-30s, with carefully styled brown hair and the kind of easy smile that probably sold a lot of houses. "Dad, I need to talk to you about something important." Emma's voice carried an unusual tension that immediately captured Rick's full attention. "What's wrong, sweetheart? I found something in Grandma's attic that I think you need to see." "It's about Mom." Rick's blood pressure spiked. "What kind of something?" "I can't explain it over the phone." "Can you come over?" "Please, Dad. It's really important." Within 30 minutes, Rick was pulling into Dorothy's driveway. The old Victorian house looked the same as always, but Emma's pale face at the front door told him everything was about to change. "Grandma's taking a nap," Emma whispered as she led him upstairs. "I didn't tell her what I found. I didn't know what to do." The attic was accessible through a narrow staircase that creaked under Rick's weight. Decades of accumulated memories filled the space under the eaves. Christmas decorations, old furniture, and endless boxes of photographs and documents. "I was helping Grandma organize these boxes for donation," Emma explained, her voice shaking slightly. "Most of it was just old clothes and books, but then I found this." She led into a small wooden trunk tucked behind a dress form. Inside were bundles of letters tied with ribbon, old jewelry, and a manila envelope that had been hidden beneath everything else. "I only opened it because I thought it might be important documents for Grandma," Emma said, handing him the envelope with trembling hands. "But look at the photos." Rick opened the envelope and felt his world shift on its axis. The photos were old, but not ancient, maybe 5 or 6 years based on the quality. They showed Lindsay unmistakably, but not as Rick had ever seen her. She was with a man Rick didn't recognize, much older than Trevor Grayson, in situations that were intimate and explicit. But it wasn't just adultery captured in these images. There were photos of Lindsay meeting with multiple men over what appeared to be months or years. Different locations, different partners, different occasions. This wasn't a simple affair. This was systematic. "Dad," Emma's voice seemed to come from far away. "Are you okay?" Rick's hands shook as he examined the photos more carefully. In several images, Lindsay was exchanging envelopes with the man. In others, she appeared to be photographing documents or papers. This wasn't just cheating. This was something much more organized and calculating. "Honey, what's wrong?" Emma asked, tears in her eyes. Rick looked at his daughter. This pure, innocent person who'd stumbled onto something that would destroy everything she believed about her family. In that moment, he made a decision that would define everything that came after. "Emma, I need you to do something very important for me," he said, his voice deadly calm. "I need you to call me tomorrow evening and tell me you found something in Grandma's attic that I need to see." "Can you do that?" "But Dad, I already..." No, sweetheart. Tomorrow you're going to call me crying and upset, and you're going to tell me you found photos on your phone that I need to see. And when I ask what's wrong, you're going to say exactly what you just said. Can you do that for me? Emma nodded, confused but trusting. Rick carefully photographed each image with his phone before placing everything back exactly as Emma had found it. As they climbed down from the attic, his mind was already working through the implications and possibilities. Emma, this is very important. You cannot tell anyone about what we found tonight. Not Grandma, not your friends, and especially not your mother. Do you understand? Yes, Dad. But what are you going to do? Rick looked at his daughter, this bright, beautiful person who trusted him to fix everything, and realized that for the first time in his life, fixing something was going to require tearing it down to the foundation first. I'm going to handle it, sweetheart. But I need time to plan. Can you trust me? Always, Dad. That night, Rick sat in his home office until dawn, studying the photos and piecing together a timeline that painted a picture far worse than simple adultery. Lindsay hadn't just betrayed their marriage. She'd been running some kind of operation that put their entire family at risk. By morning, Rick Thompson had decided that when the foundation was this corrupt, the only solution was complete demolition. Chapter 4: Building the Trap. The next evening, Rick sat in his living room waiting for Emma's call. He'd spent the day finalizing what Connor Mills called the most comprehensive surveillance package he'd ever arranged. Every device in Rick's house now recorded everything. Every vehicle was tracked, and every financial account was monitored. When Emma's call came, Rick answered on the second ring. Dad, her voice was perfectly distressed, exactly as they'd rehearsed. Honey, what's wrong? Rick asked, settling into his role. Dad, I found something in Grandma's attic that you need to see. Emma's words trembled with genuine emotion, even though she was acting. She handed me her phone showing photos. I froze in shock and immediately called the police. Rick paused. That last line wasn't what they'd discussed. You called the police? Emma, what exactly did you find? I can't talk about this over the phone, Dad. Can you come get me? I'm scared. This wasn't the script. Rick's protective instincts overrode his carefully laid plans. I'll be right there. 20 minutes later, Rick found Emma and Dorothy in the kitchen, both looking shaken. Dorothy's ancient hands wrapped around a teacup, while Emma clutched her phone like a lifeline. Mr. Thompson, Dorothy's voice was frail but determined. I'm afraid Emma found something in my attic that changes everything. Rick sat down heavily. What did you really find, Emma? Emma pulled up photos on her phone. Not the ones from the hidden envelope, but new ones she'd taken of documents found in another box entirely. Dad, I found papers that show Mom has been... I don't know how to say this. Stealing information from people. Important people. There are contracts and documents from your construction jobs, but also from other companies. And there are lists of names and amounts of money. Rick examined the documents on Emma's phone with growing horror. These weren't just random papers. They were copies of blueprints, financial statements, and security protocols from various construction sites around Denver. Some were from his own projects, but others belonged to competitors. Grandma, how long have these been in your attic? Dorothy's voice was barely a whisper. I found them last year when Lindsay asked me to store some boxes for her. She said they were old college papers and decorations. I never looked inside until Emma started organizing. Rick's mind raced through the implications. The photos he'd seen the night before weren't just evidence of the affairs. They were documentation of Lindsay using those relationships to steal industrial secrets and sensitive information. Emma, you said you called the police? I got scared and called 911, but then I hung up. I didn't know what to say. As if summoned by her words, a knock came at the front door. Through the window, Rick could see a Denver police patrol car in the driveway. Ma'am, we received a disconnected 911 call from this address. Is everything all right? Officer Maria Santos was young, but experienced enough to recognize when a domestic situation was more complicated than it appeared. When Rick showed her the documents and explained the situation, her expression grew increasingly serious. Mr. Thompson, what your wife appears to have been doing could constitute industrial espionage, theft of trade secrets, and potentially federal crimes, depending on who these companies are. We're going to need to involve detectives. Within 2 hours, Rick's quiet evening had become a crime scene. Detective Roy Phillips, a 20-year veteran with tired eyes and a methodical approach, photographed everything while asking detailed questions about Lindsay's activities and associates. Mr. Thompson, I need to ask, did you have any knowledge or suspicion about your wife's activities? Rick made a calculated decision. Detective, I recently hired a private investigator because I suspected my wife was having an affair. I never imagined anything like this. We'll need to speak with your investigator and see any evidence he's gathered. This appears to be much bigger than a marital issue. As the police processed the scene, Rick realized his carefully planned revenge had just become a federal investigation. But rather than dismay, he felt a cold satisfaction. Lindsay had built her house of cards on a foundation of lies and theft. Now it was time to watch it collapse. Dad? Emma whispered as they sat in Dorothy's living room while detectives worked upstairs. What's going to happen to Mom? Rick put his arm around his daughter, this innocent person who'd accidentally triggered the destruction of everything she'd known as normal. I don't know, sweetheart, but I promise you we're going to be okay. Chapter 5. Unraveling the Web. Detective Phillips contacted Rick the next morning with news that transformed a family crisis into something far more sinister. Mr. Thompson, we've identified some of the companies referenced in those documents. 3 of them are defense contractors and 2 are involved in critical infrastructure projects. This isn't just industrial espionage. It's potentially a national security issue. Rick sat in his office at the construction site, watching his crew pour concrete for the Meridian Plaza's foundation while his own foundation crumbled. What does that mean for my family? It means the FBI is taking over the investigation. Agent Caroline Foster will be contacting you today. Mr. Thompson, I need to ask directly. Have you noticed any unusual financial activity, unexplained income, or changes in your wife's spending habits? Rick thought about the spa treatments, the new clothes, the unexplained credit card charges. Now that you mention it, yes. She's been spending more, but I assumed it was just normal expenses. We'll need access to your financial records. And Mr. Thompson, for your family's safety, I strongly recommend you don't confront your wife about any of this until we understand the full scope of what we're dealing with. That afternoon, FBI agent Caroline Foster arrived at Thompson Construction. She was sharp-featured and precise, with the kind of intensity that suggested she'd seen worse things than industrial espionage before lunch. "Mr. Thompson, your wife appears to have been part of a sophisticated intelligence operation targeting American infrastructure and defense projects. The people she's been working with aren't just corporate competitors. They're foreign operatives." The words hit Rick like a physical blow. Foreign operatives. Based on the documents your daughter found and the surveillance photos your private investigator provided, your wife has been using romantic relationships to gather sensitive information from men with access to classified or proprietary projects. This is a textbook honey trap operation. Rick stared out his office window at the city skyline he'd helped build, realizing that his wife hadn't just betrayed their marriage. She'd potentially betrayed their country. How long has this been going on? Based on the evidence, at least 6 years. Possibly longer. "Mr. Thompson, I need to ask. Has your wife ever shown unusual interest in your construction projects, particularly any involving government contracts or critical infrastructure?" Rick's blood ran cold as memories flooded back. Lindsay asking detailed questions about the new water treatment facility his company had built. Her interest in the security systems at the federal courthouse renovation. Her casual inquiries about his subcontractors and their backgrounds. "She has," he admitted. "I thought she was just being supportive, interested in my work." "Mr. Thompson, we need your help to capture the rest of this network. But it means your wife can't know we're on to her. Can you handle that?" Rick Thompson had built his life on control and precision. Learning that his wife was a foreign operative threatened everything he believed about his ability to read people and situations. But it also activated something deeper and more dangerous in his character. The part of him that never forgot a slight and never forgave a betrayal. "What do you need me to do?" Agent Foster smiled grimly. "We need you to act normal while we set a trap. Your wife is meeting with her handlers tomorrow night. We're going to follow that meeting to its conclusion and roll up the entire network. And then your wife will face charges for espionage, theft of classified information, and conspiracy against the United States. She'll spend the rest of her life in federal prison." Rick nodded slowly. "Agent Foster, there's something else you should know. I've been planning my own form of justice before I knew how serious this was. I have surveillance equipment throughout my house and tracking on her vehicle. Mr. Thompson, this is a federal investigation now. You need to let us handle this." "I understand, but I want to watch her fall." That evening, Rick sat across from Lindsay at dinner, watching her perform the role of loving wife, while knowing she was a trained operative who'd spent years stealing from his country and destroying his family. "How was your day?" she asked, the same question she'd asked 1,000 times before. "Productive," Rick replied, cutting his steak with surgical precision. "I'm finally seeing the foundation for the Meridian Plaza take shape." "That's wonderful, honey. You work so hard." As Rick watched his wife lie to his face with practiced ease, he realized that Agent Foster was wrong about one thing. This wasn't just a federal investigation anymore. It was also his personal war, and Rick Thompson had never lost a war he was prepared to fight. Chapter 6: The Handler's Game. Emma returned home the next afternoon while Lindsay was out shopping. Rick had spent the morning helping Agent Foster's team install additional surveillance equipment throughout the house, disguised as routine maintenance and upgrades. "Dad, what's really going on?" Emma asked as they sat in his home office. "The FBI agents at Grandma's house yesterday wouldn't tell me anything except that Mom might be in trouble." Rick looked at his daughter, this brilliant, perceptive young woman who deserved the truth, but might not be able to handle it. "Emma, your mother has been stealing information from companies and government projects. She's been working with foreign agents who want to harm our country." Emma's face went pale. "You mean like a spy?" "Yes, sweetheart, like a spy." Tears filled Emma's eyes. "How long have you known?" "I suspected something was wrong for months, but I thought she was just having an affair. I never imagined this." "What's going to happen to her?" Rick pulled his daughter close. "She's going to prison for a very long time." "And Emma, there's something else. She's been using our family, our home, our life together as cover for her real job." None of what we thought was real actually was. That evening, Agent Foster called with an update that made Rick's blood boil. "Your wife met with her handler this afternoon." We followed the meeting and identified 2 additional operatives. "Mr. Thompson, they've been planning something called Operation Foundation, an attack on critical infrastructure in Denver designed to look like an accident." "What kind of attack?" "They want to use information stolen from your construction projects to sabotage the new water treatment facility in the federal courthouse." "Your wife provided them with structural weaknesses, security protocols, and maintenance schedules." Rick's vision went red. His own work, his reputation, his expertise was being used to plan attacks on innocent people. "When?" "Tomorrow night. We're going to arrest them during the operation, but Mr. Thompson, your wife will be there. She's not just providing information anymore. She's an active participant in the attack." Rick hung up the phone and sat in his office, staring at photos of Emma and building projects he'd completed over the years. Everything he'd built, everything he'd worked for had been used as a weapon against his country. At midnight, Lindsay came home from another book club meeting, humming softly as she moved through the house. Rick watched her on the surveillance monitors Agent Foster had shown him how to access. She went straight to the basement and retrieved something from behind the water heater, a laptop and phone Rick had never seen before. For 30 minutes, she worked on the laptop, uploading files and communicating with contacts Rick now knew were enemy agents. When she finished, she carefully hid the equipment and returned upstairs, transforming back into the wife and mother she pretended to be. Rick realized he was watching a master manipulator who'd spent years perfecting the role of suburban wife while serving a foreign power. The woman he'd loved, the mother of his child, had never existed at all. The next evening, Rick sat in his living room with Emma, both of them trying to act normal while FBI agents prepared to arrest Lindsay and her team at the water treatment facility. "Dad," Emma said quietly, "after this is over, what happens to us?" Rick looked at his daughter, the only real thing left in his carefully constructed world. "We start over, sweetheart. We build something new and better. Will you be able to forgive her?" Rick's expression hardened. "No, Emma, I will never forgive her. She didn't just betray our family. She betrayed our country and put innocent people at risk. Some things can't be forgiven. At 11:47 p.m., Agent Foster called. "We have them all. Your wife and 5 associates are in custody." "Mr. Thompson, it's over." Rick hung up the phone and realized that while one nightmare was ending, another was just beginning. Because now he had to figure out how to rebuild his life, knowing that everything he believed about the person closest to him had been a lie. Chapter 7: Justice and Reckoning. The federal courthouse in Denver had never felt more imposing to Rick as he sat in the gallery watching his wife's arraignment. Lindsay wore an orange jumpsuit and restraints, looking smaller and more ordinary than he'd ever seen her. Gone was the confident woman who'd manipulated him for years. In her place sat someone who looked almost fragile. Almost. Agent Foster had briefed Rick on the full scope of Lindsay's operation the day before. The network she'd been part of had stolen information worth millions and compromised dozens of infrastructure projects across the western United States. Her handler, a man named Yuri Volkov, had been operating in the U.S. for over a decade. "Your wife wasn't a reluctant participant, Mr. Thompson," Agent Foster had explained. "She was recruited in college, trained extensively, and has been a willing operative for nearly 20 years. Everything about your life together was part of her cover. 20 years. That meant she'd been a spy before they'd even met." Emma sat beside Rick in the courtroom, her hand in his as they listened to the charges. Conspiracy to commit espionage. Theft of national defense information. Conspiracy to commit sabotage. A dozen other felonies that would likely keep Lindsay in federal prison for life. When Lindsay's attorney requested bail, Rick watched his wife's face carefully. For just a moment, her mask slipped, and he saw something cold and calculating in her eyes that confirmed everything Agent Foster had told him. "Your Honor," the federal prosecutor stated, "the defendant is a trained foreign operative with extensive connections to hostile intelligence services. She poses an extreme flight risk and a continued threat to national security. The government requests that bail be denied." The judge's decision was swift. Lindsay would remain in federal custody until trial. As they left the courthouse, Emma was quiet until they reached Rick's truck. "Dad, did you see how she looked at us?" "How do you mean?" "Like we were strangers. Like she didn't even know us." Rick started the engine, his hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. "Maybe she never did know us, sweetheart. Maybe that was never her job." That afternoon, Connor Mills called with information that completed the picture of Rick's destruction. "Mr. Bob Thompson, I've been digging deeper into your wife's activities. The affair with Trevor Grayson? That was her assignment. He has access to commercial real estate databases and security information for buildings throughout Denver. She wasn't cheating on you for emotional reasons. She was working." "What about the other men in those photos Emma found?" "All of them had access to sensitive information or facilities. Your wife is what intelligence agencies call a swallow. An operative who uses romantic and sexual relationships to gather intelligence. Every affair was a job." Rick felt something cold settle in his chest. "Connor, I need you to find Trevor Grayson." "Mr. Bob Thompson, the FBI has him in custody. He's been charged as an accomplice." "I don't care. When he gets out, I want to know where he is." Connor's voice carried a warning. "Mr. Bob, Thompson, you need to be careful. The FBI is watching you too, making sure you don't interfere with their investigation or take matters into your own hands." "I understand. But, Connor, some debts can't be paid through the legal system." That evening, Rick and Emma sat in their kitchen, the same kitchen where Lindsay had made breakfast and packed lunches and played the role of mother and wife for 16 years. Always pizza. "Dad, are we going to stay in this house?" Rick looked around the space he built with his own hands, every detail crafted to create a home for his family. Now it felt like a monument to his own gullibility. "No, sweetheart. We're going to build something new, something that's actually ours." "What about Mom?" Rick's expression hardened. "Your mother chose her path. She chose her real family over us. She chose her mission over her daughter. I will never forgive that, and I will never let her back into our lives." "But what if she tries to explain? What if she says she loved us?" "Emma, love doesn't use people as weapons. Love doesn't put innocent people in danger for money or ideology. Your mother made her choice every day for 20 years. I'm making mine now." 3 weeks later, Rick received a call from Lindsay's federal public defender. "Mr. Thompson, your wife would like to see you and your daughter. She wants to explain." "No, Mr. Thompson." "She claims she was coerced, that she was trying to protect." "Counselor, your client is a trained operative who spent 20 years lying to everyone who loved her. She used my daughter as part of her cover and put innocent people at risk for money. We will not be visiting, we will not be taking calls, and we will not be listening to explanations." "Sir, she's still your daughter's mother." "No," Rick said with finality. "She's a foreign agent who used my daughter as a prop in her cover story. The woman I thought was my daughter's mother never existed." Rick hung up the phone and made a mental note to change their numbers again. Because Rick Thompson had learned that some betrayals were too fundamental to forgive, and some bridges were meant to stay burnt. Chapter 8: The Reckoning of Accomplices. 6 months after Lindsay's arrest, Rick Thompson had rebuilt his life with the same methodical precision he brought to construction projects. Thompson Construction was thriving, Emma was excelling in her new private school, and they'd moved into a custom home Rick built on the opposite side of Denver from their old neighborhood. But Rick Thompson was not a man who forgot debts. Connor Mills called on a snowy February morning with the information Rick had been waiting for. Trevor Grayson was released from federal custody yesterday. He pleaded guilty to lesser charges in exchange for cooperation. He's on probation, but essentially a free man. "Where is he?" "Mr. Thompson, where is he, Connor?" "He's back to selling real estate, working out of a small office downtown." "Rick, the FBI agents I've spoken with say you should stay away from him." "They're monitoring the situation." "I understand." Rick hung up and sat in his office overlooking the construction site for his latest project, a community center in one of Denver's struggling neighborhoods. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was building something to help people while planning to destroy someone who'd helped attack his country. That afternoon, Rick drove to Trevor Grayson's real estate office. It was a small storefront in a declining strip mall with faded signs and a parking lot that needed repaving. Through the window, Rick could see Grayson sitting at a desk talking on the phone. Trevor Grayson was younger than Rick, but had the soft look of a man who'd never faced real consequences for his actions. His clothes were expensive, but showed signs of strain, probably struggling financially after his legal troubles. Rick didn't go inside that day or the next, but he watched and he learned Grayson's routines, his weaknesses, his pressure points. 3 weeks later, Rick made his move. Thompson Construction had grown large enough to need additional office space, and Rick had been considering various properties around Denver. When he called Grayson's office requesting a consultation about commercial real estate, his voice was disguised enough that Grayson didn't recognize it. They met at a coffee shop downtown. Grayson arrived first, nervous and checking his phone constantly. When Rick walked in, recognition dawned slowly on Grayson's face, followed immediately by fear. "Mr. Thompson." "Hi." "I didn't know." "Sit down, Trevor." Rick's voice carried the kind of authority that came from years of managing construction crews and negotiating million-dollar contracts. Grayson sat. "I'm not here to hurt you, Trevor. I'm here to offer you an opportunity." "I don't understand." "My wife used you. She manipulated you into betraying your clients and your country. You were a tool in her operation." Grayson nodded miserably. "I thought she loved me. I thought we were going to be together. But you knew what you were giving her was wrong. You knew those building schematics and security protocols weren't meant for her." "Ah, yes. I knew." Rick leaned forward. "Trevor, I'm going to make this very simple. You have 2 choices. You can disappear from Denver permanently, sell your business, and start over somewhere far away. Or you can stay here and deal with the consequences of what you helped do to my family and my country." "What kind of consequences?" Rick's smile was cold. "The kind that don't involve the legal system." Grayson went pale. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm giving you the opportunity to make the right choice for once in your life. My wife is going to prison forever. But you? You get to choose whether you rebuild your life somewhere else or whether I demonstrate the kind of justice that exists outside courtrooms." Rick stood up. "You have 1 week to decide. If you're still in Denver next Friday, I'll consider that your answer." The following Tuesday, Trevor Grayson's real estate office went up for lease. By Thursday, he'd left Denver with no forwarding address. Connor Mills called Rick the following week with confirmation. Grayson sold his business to a competitor and moved to Phoenix. Word is he's starting over in retail sales. Nothing involving real estate or property information. Good. "Rick, I have to ask, what did you say to him?" "I gave him a choice, Connor. He made the smart one." Rick hung up and returned to reviewing blueprints for the community center. Some problems required legal solutions. Others required the kind of direct action that men like Trevor Grayson understood better than courtroom justice. Rick Thompson had spent his life building things. But he'd learned that sometimes destroying the right things was just as important as construction. Chapter 9. Foundations of the Future. 2 years after Lindsay's arrest, Rick Thompson stood in his new home's kitchen watching Emma make breakfast before school. At 18, she'd grown into a confident young woman who'd inherited her father's precision and determination, but with a warmth that the betrayal hadn't been able to extinguish. "Dad, I got accepted to Colorado State's engineering program." Emma announced, not looking up from her eggs. "That's outstanding, sweetheart. When do classes start?" "Fall semester. I want to specialize in structural engineering." Rick smiled, following in the old man's footsteps. "Someone has to make sure your buildings don't fall down when you retire." The normalcy of the moment felt precious to Rick. They built this new life carefully, deliberately, with security measures and privacy protections that reflected hard-won lessons about trust and vulnerability. Connor Mills had become more than an investigator. He'd become Rick's security consultant and, surprisingly, a friend. His quarterly reports confirmed that Lindsay remained in federal prison, serving a life sentence without possibility of parole. Trevor Grayson had built a quiet life in Phoenix, selling furniture and staying far away from anything involving sensitive information. Mr. Thompson, Connor had reported during their last meeting, Grayson's been clean for 2 years. Works at a furniture store, rents a small apartment, doesn't even have internet at home. "I think your message was received." The other operatives in Lindsay's network had received sentences ranging from 15 years to life. Yuri Volkov, the handler, had been exchanged in a prisoner swap after 18 months, sent back to Russia, where Rick hoped he'd find life significantly less comfortable. But justice, Rick had learned, wasn't just about punishment. It was about protecting what mattered and building something better from the ruins of betrayal. Thompson Construction had grown into the largest family-owned construction company in Colorado. Rick employed over 200 people and had contracts throughout the Rocky Mountain region. More importantly, every employee underwent extensive background checks, and every project included security measures that protected both workers and clients. "Dad," Emma said, interrupting his thoughts, "I've been thinking about Mom." Rick tensed slightly. They rarely discussed Lindsay anymore, by mutual agreement. "What about her?" "I don't hate her anymore." "I don't love her either, but I don't hate her." "That's healthy, sweetheart." "But I understand now why you can never forgive her. She didn't just betray us. She used us. She used my love for her as part of her job." Rick nodded. "Some betrayals cut too deep for forgiveness, Emma. It doesn't make us bad people to acknowledge that. Do you think she ever really loved us?" Rick had thought about this question for 2 years. "I think she loved the idea of us. I think we made her feel normal, human. But real love doesn't sacrifice the people it claims to protect." Emma finished her breakfast and grabbed her backpack. "I'm glad we're not the kind of people who pretend to forgive just to feel better about ourselves." After Emma left for school, Rick reviewed the morning's emails. Agent Foster, now a friend despite their professional beginning, had sent an update on a related case. The intelligence network Lindsay had been part of was larger than initially suspected, with operations in 12 states and connections to at least 3 foreign intelligence services. "Your wife's arrest was the keystone that brought down the entire Western Regional Network," Agent Foster had explained during a recent dinner. "The information recovered from your house and her operations led to 47 additional arrests and prevented at least 6 major attacks on infrastructure." Rick took satisfaction in knowing that Emma's discovery in Dorothy's attic had protected countless innocent people, but the personal cost remained something he carried every day. His phone buzzed with a text from a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Thompson, this is Lindsay. I know you won't visit or take my calls, but I need you to know that I loved you and Emma." Everything else was a lie, but that wasn't. Please tell Emma that her mother loved her more than the mission. Rick stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. He blocked the number and made a mental note to have Connor investigate how Lindsay had obtained his current contact information. Because Rick Thompson had learned that love without loyalty was just manipulation with better marketing. That evening, Rick and Emma sat on their back porch, watching the sunset paint the Rocky Mountains in shades of gold and red. The house Rick had built for them was smaller than their old home, but felt more solid, more real. "Dad, do you think we'll ever trust people the same way again?" "No, sweetheart, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. We'll trust more carefully, more intelligently." "Are you lonely? I mean, do you want to find someone else?" Rick considered the question seriously. Someday, maybe. But it would have to be someone who understands that trust is earned in small increments over long periods. Someone who knows that love without integrity is worthless. "Someone like you." "Someone like us," Rick corrected. "We're a team now, Emma. We protect each other." As darkness settled over Denver, Rick reflected on the lessons learned through betrayal and the price of justice. He discovered that forgiveness wasn't always virtuous, that some bridges were meant to stay burned, and that the people who truly mattered were worth any sacrifice to protect. Rick Thompson had built his life on strong foundations once before, only to discover they were illusions. This time, he'd built something real, something that would last, something that honored both justice and love without confusing one for the other. In the distance, the lights of Denver twinkled like stars, each one representing lives and families, and the infrastructure that kept the city functioning. Rick had helped build much of it, and he'd helped protect it from those who would use it as a weapon. Some foundations, Rick had learned, were worth defending at any cost. And some people were worth never forgiving at all. This is where our story comes to an end.